The courtroom felt huge to 14-year-old Zora as she sat at the wooden table, her feet barely touching the floor. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Every sound seemed too loud: the shuffling papers, whispered conversations, the squeak of the door as another person entered. Zora kept her back straight and her face calm, even though her heart was racing. She wore her best clothes today, a white button-down shirt her mother had ironed twice to get the creases just right, and dark pants that still had the department store tags on them yesterday. Her notebooks were stacked neatly in front of her, each one filled with her careful handwriting. Years of notes about laws and court cases that most adults couldn't understand. The public defender beside her kept checking his watch. He'd met Zora only 20 minutes before the hearing and had spent most of that time looking through the wrong file. Just answer the judge's questions with yes, sir, or no, sir, and we'll get through this quickly, he'd told her without making eye contact. All rise, called the bailiff, his voice booming across the room. Everyone stood as Judge Harold Brennan entered. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses that hung from a cord around his neck. Zora had researched him too. 15 years on the bench. Known for going easy on first-time offenders, but tough on repeat cases. Her case would be his fourth truancy hearing this morning. Be seated, the judge said, settling into his large chair. He picked up the file in front of him, frowning slightly as he scanned the pages. Zora watched his eyes move back and forth across the paper. She could almost tell exactly when he reached her test scores, because his eyebrows lifted just a fraction. Then his eyes flicked up to look at her, really look at her, for the first time. In the back row, Zora's mother sat with her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She worked night shifts cleaning the community college and day shifts at the grocery store. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she sat as straight as her daughter, her gaze never leaving Zora's back. Case number 47,291, truancy violation, announced the clerk. Third notice this semester. Judge Brennan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. Young lady, do you understand why you're in my courtroom today? Yes, Your Honor, Zora replied, her voice clear and steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The judge looked surprised, maybe at how grown-up she sounded. Most kids mumbled or cried in front of him. Good, he said, something changing in his expression. He set the file aside. I'd like to try something different with you today. The public defender shifted in his seat. Everyone in the local courts knew about Judge Brennan's unusual methods with young offenders. Some people called him innovative. Others said he was just showing off. I like to play a little game with the young people who come before me, the judge continued, his tone becoming more casual. I call it truth or lie. I'll ask you questions and you'll answer. After 20 years on this bench, I've gotten pretty good at spotting when someone isn't being honest with me. He smiled, not unkindly. If I think you're telling me the truth, maybe we can figure out a solution that works better than the standard penalties. How does that sound? Zora nodded once. I understand, Your Honor. Excellent, said Judge Brennan, settling back in his chair like a chess player making the first move. Let's start with the big question, why haven't you been going to school? What he didn't know, what nobody in the room except Zora's mother knew, was that this wasn't going to be like his other cases. The girl sitting before him had been reading law books since she was 10 years old. She'd memorized state education codes and court precedents. She'd prepared for this moment. And as Zora took a small breath and opened her mouth to speak, her mother closed her eyes briefly. The judge had no idea what was coming. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Judge Brennan waited for Zora's answer. He'd seen thousands of kids in his courtroom over the years. Nervous kids, angry kids, scared kids. Most of them fidgeted or looked at the floor. This girl looked him right in the eye. Your Honor, Zora began, her voice steady, I haven't been attending West Side Middle School because I've been studying elsewhere. The judge tapped his pen against his notepad. Studying elsewhere? That's a new one. A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff coughed to hide a smile. And where exactly have you been studying? Judge Brennan asked, playing along. At City College, sir. I've been sitting in on classes there. The public defender glanced at Zora with a frown. This wasn't what they'd discussed in their brief meeting. The plan was to apologize, promise to do better, and hope for community service. Now the girl was digging herself deeper. Judge Brennan leaned forward. "Young lady, City College doesn't allow middle schoolers to just walk in and take classes. That's not how it works." "They allow visitors to audit classes with professor permission," Zora replied. She reached for one of her notebooks and carefully opened it. "I have signed statements from 3 professors confirming my attendance." The public defender looked startled as Zora handed him several neatly folded papers. He hesitated before standing up to present them to the judge, unsure if this was helping or hurting their case. Judge Brennan's eyebrows rose as he examined the papers. They appeared to be on official college letterhead, with signatures and contact information for each professor. "Constitutional law, American history, and advanced mathematics," he read aloud, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. He looked back at Zora. "These are college-level courses?" "Yes, Your Honor." The truancy officer shifted in his seat, whispering something to the district attorney beside him. This wasn't following the usual script. Judge Brennan set the papers down. "Let's say these are legitimate. That still doesn't explain why you didn't follow proper channels. There are programs for gifted students, procedures that need to be followed." Zora nodded politely. "I understand that, Your Honor, but those programs require school recommendation, lengthy application processes, and fees my mother can't afford right now." She glanced back at her mother, whose face showed a mixture of worry and pride. "My mom works 2 jobs to keep our apartment," Zora continued. "She leaves for work at 4:30 in the morning and gets home after 9 most nights. She doesn't have time to attend multiple school meetings or fill out complicated paperwork." The courtroom grew quieter. Even the clerk stopped typing. "Besides," Zora added, her voice gaining confidence, "according to Maryland Education Code Section 7-301, subsection A1, a child may be excused from public school attendance if they're receiving regular and thorough instruction during the school year in the studies usually taught in the public schools to children of the same age." Judge Brennan's truth or lie game was taking an unexpected turn. He'd meant to catch Zora in a lie, to guide her toward admitting she was skipping school to hang out with friends or avoid homework. Instead, she was quoting education code at him. The public defender looked as surprised as everyone else. He'd handled dozens of truancy cases, and none of them had gone like this. "Young lady," Judge Brennan said, removing his glasses, "where did you learn about Maryland Education Code?" "The community college library, sir. My mother cleans there at night, and sometimes I go with her when we can't afford a babysitter for my younger brothers. The librarians let me read whatever I want while I wait." The judge studied Zora more carefully now, seeing her in a new light. Her clothes were worn but spotless, her notebooks organized with color-coded tabs, her posture perfect despite the too-big chair. "I see," he said finally. "And what exactly were you hoping would happen today? What outcome are you looking for?" Zora took a deep breath. The question was important, maybe the most important one he'd ask. Judge Brennan's game of truth or lie had just become very real, and she knew her next words might change everything. In the back row, her mother leaned forward slightly, holding her breath. Zora folded her hands on the table in front of her. Everyone in the courtroom was waiting for her answer. "What I want, Your Honor, is to keep learning at my own pace," she said. "I want a chance to show that what I'm doing works better for me than sitting in a classroom where I've already finished the textbooks by the second week of school." The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the papers Zora had provided. "You said you're familiar with education code," he said. "Then you also know that Maryland law requires proper oversight. You can't just decide on your own that you're too smart for middle school." Zora nodded. "I understand that, sir, but there's more." She turned to another page in her notebook. In Thompson versus the State Board of Education from 2018, the Court of Appeals ruled that when traditional channels create undue hardship, a student can prove they're receiving proper education after the fact. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The district attorney frantically flipped through a legal reference book, trying to verify what Zora had just said. "Your Honor," the public defender cut in, suddenly seeming more interested in the case, "I'd like to request a brief recess to consult with my client." Judge Brennan held up his hand. "Not yet. I'm curious to see where this goes." He turned back to Zora. You're saying this Thompson case applies to your situation, that your family faces undue hardship. Zora looked back at her mother, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. When she turned back to the judge, her voice was quieter but just as clear. My mom works from 4:30 a.m. until 9 p.m. most days. She cleans office buildings before dawn and the college library at night. My dad left 3 years ago. I have 2 younger brothers, ages 6 and 8. I make their lunches, help with their homework, and put them to bed most nights. She took a breath before continuing. When I was 11, the school wanted to put me in a gifted program. They sent home forms that needed to be filled out, meetings my mom needed to attend during her work hours, and fees for special materials. We couldn't make it work. Judge Brennan's expression softened slightly. His truth or lie game had revealed more truth than he'd expected. So I found my own way, Zora continued. I started reading books from the college library while my mom cleaned. One of the professors noticed me reading a law textbook and said I could sit in on his class if I wanted. Then another professor let me join hers. The truancy officer leaned over to whisper something to the district attorney, who nodded with a concerned expression. I take detailed notes, Zora said, gesturing to her notebooks. I do all the assigned readings. I've even taken some of the tests, though they can't give me official credit. She pulled out another paper from her folder. This is my score on the state standardized test from last month. I took it at school on the one day I made sure to be there. The public defender accepted the paper and handed it to the judge, looking more impressed by the minute. Judge Brennan studied the test results, his eyebrows rising slightly. These scores are at a college sophomore level. He looked up at Zora with new respect in his eyes. In all subjects. Yes, sir, Zora said. Making me go back to regular classes at Westside would actually slow down my education, and that goes against the whole point of school attendance laws, doesn't it? Those laws exist to make sure kids are learning, not to hold them back. The courtroom was completely silent now. The clerk had stopped typing to watch. Even the bailiff was paying close attention. Judge Brennan set down all the papers and removed his reading glasses. The truth or lie game had transformed into something he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, he found himself at a loss in his own courtroom. Ms. Washington, he said finally, using her name for the first time, you've given me a lot to think about. He glanced at the clock on the wall. I think we could all use a 15-minute recess. Court will resume at 10:45. As the judge stood and left the bench, the public defender turned to Zora with wide eyes. Where did you learn to argue like that? He whispered. Zora shrugged slightly. Books, she said simply, and watching court TV shows. Her mother made her way to the front of the courtroom, moving carefully past the rows of seats. When she reached Zora, she didn't say a word. She just took her daughter's hand and squeezed it tightly. The 15-minute recess stretched to 20, then 30. Zora sat quietly at the table, reviewing her notes while her public defender paced nearby, occasionally glancing at her with a mix of confusion and newfound respect. Her mother had returned to her seat in the back of the courtroom, checking her watch nervously. She was already missing her shift at the grocery store. Behind the scenes, Judge Brennan had called the 3 professors listed on Zora's letters. All confirmed her story. Professor Chen, who taught advanced mathematics, even went further. That girl solves problems that stump my junior year students, he told the judge. It would be a crime to waste a mind like hers. When Judge Brennan finally returned to the courtroom, his formal demeanor had softened slightly. The district attorney and the truancy officer had been called into his chambers during the recess as well, and they now wore expressions that ranged from puzzled to mildly annoyed. Court is back in session, the bailiff announced as everyone rose. Judge Brennan settled into his chair and looked directly at Zora. Ms. Washington, I verified your attendance with the professors you mentioned. They speak very highly of you. He adjusted his glasses. But we still have a legal issue to resolve. The law exists for a reason, and I can't simply allow students to create their own educational programs, no matter how bright they are. Zora nodded, expecting this. The public defender shifted uncomfortably beside her. However, the judge continued, I believe there may be a middle ground here. He looked toward the truancy officer. Mr. Patterson, is there any precedent for a flexible attendance arrangement in cases like this? The truancy officer cleared his throat. There's the independent study program, Your Honor, but it's typically reserved for students with medical issues or professional athletic careers. Or perhaps students with exceptional academic needs, Judge Brennan suggested, raising an eyebrow. Zora sat up a little straighter. Was this actually going to work? Your Honor, the district attorney cut in, we can't just make exceptions for every student who decides they're too advanced for regular school. There's a process for these things. I'm well aware of the process, Counselor, Judge Brennan replied, a slight edge to his voice. I'm also aware that our education system doesn't always serve every student effectively. He turned back to Zora. Young lady, if we were to create a flexible arrangement, would you be willing to meet certain requirements? Regular check-ins with a school counselor, standardized testing, documentation of your college attendance. Yes, Your Honor, Zora replied quickly. I'm happy to prove I'm learning. That's all I want, to keep learning at my own pace. The judge nodded thoughtfully. And your family situation? Your mother works long hours, and you help care for your younger brothers. Yes, sir. I make sure they get to school on time, help with their homework, cook dinner most nights. Zora hesitated, then added, but I still find time for my own studies. I use every minute I can. Judge Brennan looked toward Zora's mother in the back of the room. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of sacrifice and pride. Ms. Washington, the judge said, turning back to Zora, one last question in our game of truth or lie. What do you want to do with all this knowledge you're gathering? What's your goal? The courtroom grew quiet. This wasn't a legal question, but a human one. Zora took a deep breath. I want to become a lawyer, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady and clear. And then a judge. I want to help fix the systems that don't work for everyone. A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. The public defender looked down at his hands, a small smile on his face. Judge Brennan studied Zora for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Well, he said finally, it seems to me that you're already on your way. He turned to the court clerk. I'd like to schedule a follow-up hearing in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I'm ordering the school district to work with Ms. Washington to develop an individualized education plan that accommodates her advanced studies and family responsibilities. He looked back at Zora. And I'd like weekly progress reports from those professors of yours. If we're going to try something new here, we're going to do it right. For the first time that day, Zora allowed herself a small smile. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. Thank you, Your Honor, she said quietly. The judge's truth or lie game had led somewhere neither of them expected. 2 weeks passed quickly. On the day of the follow-up hearing, Zora arrived at the courthouse early, wearing the same white button-down shirt, but with a navy blue sweater over it that her mother had found at a thrift store the weekend before. This time she wasn't nervous. This time she was ready. The same public defender greeted her in the hallway, but something had changed. He shook her hand properly and actually looked her in the eyes. I reviewed your case file thoroughly this time, he told her with a small smile. And I did some research on that Thompson case you mentioned. Pretty impressive that you knew about that. Zora nodded. Thank you for being here, she said politely. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt different. The truancy officer was there, along with someone new. A woman in a neat pantsuit who Zora didn't recognize. Her mother slipped into the back row just as the bailiff called everyone to stand for Judge Brennan's entrance. Good morning, the judge said as he settled in. We're here for the follow-up hearing on case number 47,291. He looked at Zora with what almost seemed like a hint of warmth. Ms. Washington, I see you're present and on time. A good start. The woman in the pantsuit stood. Your Honor, I'm Dr. Reynolds from the school district's Gifted Education Department. As requested, we've been working to develop an individualized plan for Ms. Washington. Judge Brennan nodded. Please proceed. Dr. Reynolds approached the bench and handed over a thick folder. We've created what we're calling a flexible education pathway. It allows Ms. Washington to continue her college-level studies while fulfilling state education requirements. The judge flipped through the papers, occasionally glancing up at Zora. I see regular check-ins with a school counselor, quarterly standardized assessments, and an assigned mentor from the high school's pre-law program. Yes, Your Honor, Dr. Reynolds confirmed. We've also arranged for transportation assistance, so Ms. Washington's mother won't need to take additional time from work. Zora glanced back at her mother, whose face showed a mixture of relief and disbelief. Transportation had been one of their biggest challenges. Judge Brennan turned to the truancy officer. Mr. Patterson, does this arrangement satisfy the legal requirements for school attendance? The officer nodded reluctantly. It's unusual, but it meets the technical requirements under Section 7 to 301, as the student pointed out in our last hearing. He didn't sound thrilled, but he wasn't fighting it either. The judge looked directly at Zora now. I've also received reports from your professors at City College. Professor Chen seems particularly impressed with your work in advanced mathematics. He removed his glasses. Professor Liu from Constitutional Law suggests you might consider taking the actual course for credit next semester. A small buzz of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Taking courses for actual college credit would be extraordinary for a 14-year-old. Before I make my final ruling, Judge Brennan continued, I want to ask about your brothers. Your family responsibilities were a significant factor in this case. How will this new arrangement affect them? Zora hadn't expected this question. She took a moment before answering. The transportation help means I'll still be able to get my brothers to their school before heading to my classes, she explained. And I'll still be home in time to help with homework and dinner. She paused. Actually, this might make things better. If I'm not worried about getting in trouble for missing regular school, I can focus more on them and my studies. Judge Brennan nodded slowly, studying her face. The truth or lie game from their first meeting seemed to linger between them. He was still looking for honesty, and she was still providing it. Very well, he said finally. Based on the plan submitted by the school district and the positive reports from City College, I'm approving this flexible education pathway for Ms. Washington. He made a note in the file. The truancy charges are hereby dismissed, conditional upon continued compliance with this plan. The public defender patted Zora's shoulder lightly. Her mother let out a breath she'd been holding since the hearing began. But Judge Brennan wasn't finished. There's one more thing, he said, looking directly at Zora again. Given your interest in law and your evident aptitude for it, I'd like to make an additional recommendation. Zora leaned forward slightly, wondering what was coming next. There's a program called the Justice Pipeline that provides mentorship to students interested in legal careers. I happen to sit on its board. He allowed himself a small smile. I think you'd be an excellent candidate, Ms. Washington. If you're interested, of course. For the first time since this whole process began, Zora was genuinely surprised. The Justice Pipeline was well known and highly competitive. Law firms funded it, judges supported it, and it had helped dozens of students from underrepresented backgrounds get into top law schools. I'd be very interested, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady despite her excitement. Could, Judge Brennan nodded. Then it's settled. He brought down his gavel lightly. Case dismissed. 1 month after the hearing, Zora sat in the back row of a large classroom at City Law School. This wasn't one of her usual college classes. Today was her first Justice Pipeline meeting, and her stomach was filled with butterflies. Around her sat 20 other students, most of them high schoolers. They wore pressed shirts and neat pants, carried expensive backpacks, and chatted easily with each other. Zora clutched her worn notebook and tried not to feel out of place in her thrift store clothes. Welcome, everyone, called a tall woman at the front of the room. I'm Professor Winters, the faculty advisor for Justice Pipeline. We're going to start with introductions, and then I'll explain how a program works. One by one, the students stood up and introduced themselves. Most came from private schools or specialized public school programs. Many had parents who were doctors, professors, or business owners. When it was Zora's turn, she took a deep breath and stood. I'm Zora Washington. I'm 14. I don't attend a regular school right now. I have a special arrangement where I take classes at City College while completing my middle school requirements. She hesitated, then added, Judge Brennan recommended me for this program. A murmur went through the room. Everyone knew Judge Brennan. He was a big deal in the local legal community. Professor Winters raised her eyebrows with interest. Judge Brennan recommended you personally. That's unusual, she said. He must have been impressed by something. Before Zora could respond, the classroom door opened and Judge Brennan himself walked in. Everyone straightened up immediately. "Sorry I'm late," he said, nodding to Professor Winters. "Court ran over." He scanned the room, his eyes finding Zora. He gave her a small nod of recognition. "Judge Brennan has graciously offered to speak to our new members today," Professor Winters explained. "He's been a supporter of Justice Pipeline since we started 8 years ago." The judge moved to the front of the room. He didn't use notes, just spoke from experience. He talked about the challenges of the legal system, the importance of diverse perspectives on the bench, and why programs like Justice Pipeline mattered. "The law isn't just about memorizing cases and statutes," he said. "It's about understanding people. It's about seeing the human story behind every case number." Zora wrote furiously in her notebook, capturing every word. When Judge Brennan finished speaking, Professor Winters opened the floor for questions. Several hands shot up, but to Zora's surprise, the judge pointed to her first. "Ms. Washington, you've recently had your own experience with the court system. Any questions for me?" The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. Zora swallowed hard, but kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. You mentioned that diverse perspectives matter in law. But the system seems set up so only certain people can succeed, people with money, time, and connections. How do we really change that?" The question hung in the air. Some students looked uncomfortable, but Judge Brennan nodded slowly. "That's exactly the question we should be asking," he said. "The truth is, there are barriers built into our system. Programs like Justice Pipeline help, but they're just a start." He looked around the room. "Real change will come from people who understand those barriers firsthand and work to remove them." His eyes returned to Zora. "Sometimes it takes someone who has navigated those obstacles to show us a better path." After the meeting ended, students gathered in small groups, talking excitedly. Zora packed up her notebook, planning to hurry home to help her brothers with homework. But Judge Brennan approached her desk. "Ms. Washington, a moment please." She looked up, surprised. "Yes, Your Honor?" "No need for that here," he said with a small smile. "We're not in court now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is for my judicial clerk, Ms. Taylor. She's headed to Harvard Law next fall." Zora took the card carefully. It had a phone number handwritten on the back. "She's looking for someone to help organize case files in my chambers a few hours each week. Pay position, flexible hours." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Interested?" Zora stared at the card, her mind racing. Working in a judge's chambers? Learning from a Harvard-bound clerk? And getting paid? The position would normally go to a college student, Judge Brennan continued, but I've been known to make exceptions for exceptional circumstances. Zora thought of her mother working double shifts, her brothers needing new school shoes, the bills that piled up each month. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm definitely interested." "Good," Judge Brennan nodded. "Call that number tomorrow. Ms. Taylor is expecting to hear from you." As he walked away, Zora remained still, looking down at the business card in her hand. This wasn't just about a job. This was a door opening to a world she had only read about in books. And it had all started with a game of truth or lie. 3 months later, Zora walked through the courthouse with confidence. The security guards nodded to her. They knew her now. She carried a stack of neatly organized files and a new backpack that she bought with her own money from working in Judge Brennan's chambers. Life had changed dramatically since that first day in court. The flexible education pathway was working better than anyone expected. Zora's test scores continued to impress her professors, and the school district was now considering using her case as a model for other exceptional students. But the biggest change was at home. The steady income from her court job meant her mother could cut back to just one full-time position instead of working double shifts. They'd moved to a slightly bigger apartment closer to the boys' school, and for the first time in years, her mother was able to attend their parent-teacher conferences. Zora turned down the familiar hallway to Judge Brennan's chambers. Ms. Taylor, the judicial clerk, looked up from her desk and smiled. "Perfect timing," she said. "The judge was just asking for you. He's in his office." Zora knocked lightly on the open door. Judge Brennan was reading through case notes but set them aside when he saw her. "Ah, there you are," he said. Have a seat. I have something to discuss with you. For a brief moment, Zora felt a flicker of worry. Was something wrong? Was he going to say they didn't need her help anymore? I received an interesting phone call this morning, the judge began, leaning back in his chair. From Professor Liu at City College, the one who teaches constitutional law. Zora nodded, waiting. He tells me that the State Bar Association is hosting its annual moot court competition next week. Are you familiar with what that is? Yes, sir, Zora replied. It's where law students practice arguing cases in front of judges, like a simulation of a real court. Exactly. Judge Brennan nodded. Well, it seems one of the teams has had a student drop out due to illness. Professor Liu suggested you as a replacement. Zora's eyes widened. But that's for law students. I'm 14. The judge smiled slightly, which is precisely what I told him. And do you know what he said? He didn't wait for an answer. He said, age is just a number. That girl knows more constitutional precedent than most second-year law students. Zora sat very still, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Normally, I'd say it's inappropriate, Judge Brennan continued. But then I remembered our first meeting, when you cited Thompson versus the State Board of Education without missing a beat. He tapped his fingers on the desk. So I'm going to leave this decision to you. If you want to try, I'll back you. If you think it's too much right now, that's completely understandable. Zora thought about it. The idea was terrifying. Standing up in front of real judges and law professors, competing against actual law students. But then she thought about how scared she'd been that first day in court and how she'd done it anyway. When is it? She asked. Next Saturday. You'd have a week to prepare with the team. Professor Liu said they'd meet every evening. Zora bit her lip. My brothers. I need to help them with homework and make dinner. I thought about that, the judge interrupted. Ms. Taylor has a younger sister who's studying education. She's willing to help with your brothers a few hours each evening this week. Paid, of course. Consider it part of your preparation expenses. Zora looked up, surprised that he'd thought so carefully about her family responsibilities. So, Judge Brennan said, what do you think? Want to show those law students what you can do? Something shifted inside Zora's chest, a feeling of doors opening, of possibilities expanding. 6 months ago, she'd been worried about getting in trouble for missing school. Now she was being invited to compete in a law school competition. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. I want to do it. The day of the competition arrived faster than Zora could have imagined. She stood outside the grand courtroom of the State Bar Association building, dressed in a new navy blue suit that Ms. Taylor had helped her pick out. Her teammates, all in their 20s, huddled around her. Remember, said one, you take the First Amendment argument. You've got this. Zora nodded, her stomach in knots. Through the doors, she could see the room filling with spectators, law professors, practicing attorneys, and judges. And there, in the third row, sat her mother and brothers, dressed in their Sunday best. Beside them was Judge Brennan, not in his robes but in a regular suit. When the bailiff called them in, Zora took a deep breath and walked through the doors, head high. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. That game of truth or lie in Judge Brennan's courtroom had changed her life forever. And this was just the beginning.